My dad slapped me after refusing to lend me the BMW for a chakra appointment. So I canceled the mortgage, cut off the bills, let my sister's car get repossessed, closed a $1.2 million deal. I should have understood it the moment he said no, not when his hand hit my face. Before that. The decision had already been made for me, and everyone in that room knew it except me. 2 days later, when my mother called in a panic, asking why the bills weren't being paid, it was almost funny. The first thing I noticed when I hit the floor was how clean the carpet was. That's the part that still bothers me. You'd think the first thing you'd register after your father's palm cracks across your face, hard enough to whip your head sideways, would be the pain, or the shock, or the thin metallic taste gathering behind your teeth. Those came a second later, but in that strange, suspended instant, the one where your brain refuses to label what just happened, I noticed the rug, cream-colored Persian, hand-knotted, 8 by 10. I knew every detail because I'd bought it for my mother 2 Christmases earlier. $20,400. I remember the exact amount because I spent weeks researching it like it was an acquisition, reading about wool density, pile height, weaving regions, dye age, knot count. She had mentioned once, casually, while flipping through a home magazine, that she'd always wanted a real Persian rug in the living room. Not some machine-made imitation from a chain store, a real one, something with history in it. So I found one. I was still half on that rug when the blood touched my tongue. My cheek was pressed into fibers I had paid for, and all I could think was, this is what I bought with my money. My mother reached over and adjusted a throw pillow like something on the couch had shifted out of place. She didn't look at me. My sister Aubrey barely paused. She studied one hand, then the other, then went back to filing her nails. That was the moment. Not the slap itself, the silence after it. Before I stood up, before I walked into the rain, before I drove 8 hours through a storm, salvaged the meeting I was supposed to miss, closed a 7-figure client, and then started removing every layer of financial support I had quietly wrapped around my family for years, I made a decision so calm it unsettled even me. I was done. Not angry done, not crying in the car done, not call a friend and rant done. Done in the way a beam cracks inside a house. Quietly. Permanently. The structure still stands for a while, but it's already over. I got to my feet, smoothed the front of my blazer, picked up my bag, and walked out of that house for the last time. If I start with the slap, though, you won't understand the weight of what I walked away from. Not emotionally, not financially, not structurally. To understand why I took everything apart one automatic payment at a time, you need to understand how long I'd been carrying them. You need to see the architecture of it. Because when I finally stopped, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like setting down something so heavy I hadn't realized my whole body had bent around it. My name is Natalie Mercer. I'm 31. I have an MBA from Northwestern, and 8 months ago I stepped into a VP role at a mid-sized tech consulting firm called Halcyon Ridge Advisory. It's the kind of job people spend 15 years chasing. The kind with a glass office, an expense account, and last-minute flights to sit across from clients worth more to the firm than most people make in a decade. The flight I missed that morning mattered. A lot. I had 48 hours' notice to get from our office in Illinois to a client site in North Carolina and present a turnaround plan tied to a contract worth just over $1 million. We were in a sensitive stage. I was leading. Missing it wasn't an inconvenience. It was the kind of mistake people remember when promotion season comes around. My car was in the shop. Transmission issue. The rental I'd reserved had fallen through because the location overbooked. I'd run every possible option before I called my parents that morning. All I needed was their SUV for the drive to the airport shuttle lot 30 minutes away. Instead, my father looked at me over his coffee and said, "Your sister needs it." I thought I'd misheard him. For what? He didn't even hesitate. Spa day. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes your body does something small and stupid when it's trying not to break. Dad, I'm trying to make a flight. He set the mug down. And Aubrey has plans. That was the scale in that house. That was always the scale. My work, my time, my money, my effort on one side. Aubrey's mood on the other. And somehow the math kept coming out the same. I grew up outside Columbus, Ohio, in the kind of neighborhood people describe as solid. 4-bedroom house, 2-car garage, trim hedges, patio furniture covered for winter. On the outside, everything looked stable, respectable, comfortable enough that nobody would think to ask who was actually holding it up. My mother, Elaine, worked part-time as a bookkeeper 3 days a week and treated the rest of her schedule like a rotating design show. She could spend 6 straight hours choosing between shades of white for a guest room no one used. My father, Russell, spent 2 decades in commercial insurance until his firm restructured and cut him loose at 53. After that, he became the kind of man who sat in front of cable news all afternoon and talked about standards while contributing nothing to the household except commentary and tension. Then there was Aubrey. Aubrey was 24, 7 years younger than me, and carried herself with the eerie certainty of someone who had never been forced to absorb consequence. She had dropped out of 2 colleges, quit a receptionist job after 1 week because the commute drained her energy, and spent the last year building what she called a wellness brand on Instagram. From what I could tell, that meant posting photos of herself in hotel robes, holding green juice, and captioning them with things like "protect your peace and alignment is non-negotiable." She had 2,300 followers. She had been doing it for 14 months. She had earned exactly $0. I, meanwhile, had been paying, quietly, automatically, every month for 5 years, the following: the mortgage on my parents' 4-bedroom house in the Columbus suburb of Bexley. $2,100 a month. The numbers were ugly, long before the slap. That was the part no one ever said out loud. By the time my mother called, asking why the bills weren't paid, she wasn't asking what happened. She was asking why the machine had stopped. The BMW lease came first. A black 3 Series. My father had put in Aubrey's name when she announced she was building a wellness platform and needed a car that reflected the brand. $680 a month for an image nobody was buying. Then the utilities, electric, gas, water, usually around $340, higher in winter. Internet, streaming subscriptions, premium channels nobody needed, another $180. Groceries through a delivery service my mother preferred because she hated stores and claimed the fluorescent lighting gave her headaches. $600 a month, automatically charged. Altogether, it hovered around $3,900 a month. $47,000 a year. For 5 years. If you're doing the math, yes. I did too. Many nights, usually around 2 in the morning, staring at my ceiling with my laptop open, asking myself how something that started as help had hardened into infrastructure. It hadn't happened all at once. It never does. When my father lost his job, I wired over a few hundred for groceries. Temporary. Then 1 month, the mortgage came up short, so I covered it. Also temporary. But in my family, temporary was how permanent entered the room. One favor became a pattern. One pattern became expectation. One expected payment became a system nobody acknowledged because systems are easier to live with when you pretend they formed naturally. No one ever thanked me. Not once. What they said instead was, "You know how much pressure your father's under." Or, "Aubrey needs room to focus right now." Or the one that came dressed as logic. "You can afford it." As if affordability creates duty. As if being capable of carrying a weight means it was yours to carry. As if the money explained everything else. As if the money made the humiliation coherent. The week everything broke, I'd already been running on fumes. 3 straight days of client calls, slide revisions, internal reviews, late-night markups. Then my assistant, Nisha, forwarded the calendar change I'd been dreading before I even opened it. The Ellery Freight presentation had been moved up. Not delayed, moved up. A meeting I had spent 6 weeks preparing for, and 10 more days expecting to refine, was now 48 hours away. Ellery Freight was a $20 million logistics company shopping for a full-service consulting partner. Our firm had been in a 3-way pitch battle for 9 months, and I was leading the account. My name was on the deck, my framework, my financial model, my recommendations. If that meeting went badly, it wasn't just my bonus on the line. It was my credibility. Maybe my position, maybe worse. People in firms like mine don't always get fired in dramatic ways. Sometimes they just stop being invited into the rooms that matter. My flight had been booked for the next morning, O'Hare to Charlotte, 7:15 a.m. At 9 the night before, United canceled it. Mechanical issue. The next direct option was the following afternoon, landing roughly 3 hours after I was supposed to be in the meeting. My car, a 2019 Subaru Outback, was already at the dealership for transmission work. I'd dropped it off that morning. At 9:15 p.m., I called the service manager, Eric Donnelly, a guy I'd known for years. He sounded genuinely sorry, which did absolutely nothing for me. Parts delay. Nothing he could do. Earliest pickup was Thursday. I checked every rental agency within 15 miles. Nothing. A convention downtown had wiped out local inventory. There was one place left, a dim little outfit near an industrial strip called Great Lakes Auto Hire, advertising a 2018 Nissan Versa with 94,000 miles, and reviews that repeatedly mentioned stale smoke and an engine light that came and went for no reason. They wanted $1,000 for 48 hours because of surge pricing. I booked it anyway, just in case. Then I drove to my parents' house. Because the BMW was sitting right there in the driveway, washed, polished, untouched, reserved the next day for nothing more urgent than Aubrey's energy reset. And yes, looking back, I can see how naive that was. But there's a specific kind of denial that grows inside people like me. The kind raised to translate neglect into misunderstanding, selfishness into stress, cruelty into bad timing. I really believed that once the choice was put plainly in front of them, my career or her spa appointment, they would choose the obvious thing. I got there a little after 10. My father answered the door, already wearing that collapsed posture he somehow carried even while standing. Shoulders dropped, jaw set forward, one hand still on the remote. He looked annoyed before I spoke, as if need itself offended him. I explained everything cleanly. No theatrics. Flight canceled. Car in the shop. Critical meeting in 36 hours. I need the BMW for 2 days. I'll return it detailed. Full tank. No mileage issue. I just need help. He barely shifted his gaze from the television. Aubrey needs it tomorrow. I looked past him into the living room. She was stretched across the leather sofa, another purchase I had partially funded in a house I was already keeping afloat, filing her nails with the serene focus of someone whose life had never once required triage. Aubrey, I said, and I remember how careful my voice sounded, how measured, because some part of me still believed composure could unlock decency. This meeting could decide whether I keep my job. The car is sitting there. I just need it for 48 hours. She glanced up. That was the worst part. Not contempt. Not even mockery. Indifference. Real, unguarded indifference. The expression of someone who had been taught for so long that her comfort came first, she no longer saw that as privilege. Just physics. I have my energy alignment tomorrow, she said. I'm already under a lot right now. I stared at her for a second, waiting for the punchline, for some flicker of embarrassment, some sign that she hurt herself. Nothing. Behind me, rain ticked against the front windows. On the TV, someone was shouting about the economy. My mother stood in the doorway to the kitchen, drying the same clean glass with the same dish towel, watching all of it with that careful blankness she wore whenever a moral choice threatened to become inconvenient. And that's when I understood this wasn't a conversation I was going to win. It was a ritual, and I had been cast, once again, in the role designed to lose. The room changed before I moved. That's what I remember now. Not because anyone rushed to stop it, because no one did. And once you see that kind of stillness around violence, something in you goes cold for good. "Her chakras," I said. My voice sounded thin, almost controlled. "I'm about to lose my career over her chakras?" Aubrey didn't even flinch. My father muted the television for the first time that night and turned toward me like I'd broken some rule by saying the quiet part out loud. "You always make everything about you," he said. I've replayed the next few seconds so many times I could probably recite the angles. 400 times, maybe more. And I still can't find the warning. I can't locate the exact instant I should have stepped back, lowered my voice, left sooner, recognized the look in his face. He had never hit me before. He had said cruel things, yes, sharp things. Those little precision cuts, disguised as standards. Disappointment, concern. But not this. Never physical. He crossed the room in 4 strides and hit me hard across the left side of my face, open hand, full force. The sound cracked through the house. My head jerked sideways. My teeth caught the inside of my lip. I stumbled against the arm of the sofa, Aubrey's sofa, the one I had helped pay for, and then my knees gave out, and I hit the rug. For a second, everything went white and thin and ringing. I don't know how long I stayed down. 3 seconds. Maybe less. Long enough to taste blood. Long enough to realize no one was coming toward me. When I looked up, my mother was sitting at the far end of the couch, smoothing a throw pillow with both hands, like the fabric required concentration. She never looked at my face. Aubrey had already gone back to filing her nails, and my father stood over me, breathing through his nose, not wild, not ashamed. More like a man who had completed something necessary. That was the moment the denial finally broke. I got up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I don't even know if the pain had arrived yet. Adrenaline is merciful that way. It lets you function before it lets you feel. I just looked at them, one by one, all 3 of them. In the house I was helping keep, standing over the rug I had bought, inside a life they had built on top of my quiet labor. And I walked out. No one followed me. The Nissan Versa smelled exactly the way the reviews had promised. Stale smoke, chemical air freshener, something faintly sour under both. I put the $1,000 charge on my Amex, took the key envelope from an overnight clerk named Dale, who never lifted his eyes from his phone, and pulled out of the lot at 11:43 p.m. I stopped at a pharmacy on the edge of town, bought a bag of ice, lip balm, concealer, and a travel toothbrush, then sat in the parking lot with the ice pressed to my face and took inventory. Split lip, swelling, but manageable. Cheek already heating under the skin, which meant bruising by morning. Fine. I had good makeup, better posture, years of practice looking composed when I wasn't. My laptop was in my bag. The deck was backed up in 3 places. My charger was with me. My notes were synced. The meeting was in roughly 30 hours. I had everything I needed. At 11:51, with melting ice in one hand and blood drying at the corner of my mouth, I opened my banking portal and started cutting cords. BMW lease autopay canceled. I had been the authorized payer on Aubrey's car since the lease was signed, a detail my father had never really asked about. In our family, financial obligations were assigned the way weather happens. You were informed, and then it became normal. Utilities, removed, electric, gas, water, internet, canceled, streaming subscriptions, deleted, grocery delivery account, terminated. Each click felt strangely clean, not dramatic, not reckless, administrative, like correcting records that had stayed wrong too long. The mortgage was different. And I need to be precise here, because that timeline matters. I did not stop paying the mortgage in a burst of anger that night. I had stopped 2 months earlier. That decision had happened in my therapist's office, during a Tuesday evening session with Dr. Elena Price, a psychologist I'd been seeing for 2 years, mostly to untangle the kind of guilt that gets mistaken for love when you grow up in a family like mine. That night, I had asked, for maybe the 100th time, why they kept treating me like an ATM with feelings they found inconvenient. And she said, very quietly, "You keep asking why they won't change. Try asking what stays comfortable for them if they never have to." That sentence followed me home. It sat in my kitchen while I answered emails. It rode with me in elevators. It waited in the silence after I sent each payment. What would change if I stopped making it painless for them to remain exactly who they were? So, 60 days before the slap, with no announcement, no speech, no ultimatum, I called the mortgage servicer and removed myself as the third-party payer. The loan wasn't in my name. The house wasn't in my name. The debt had never been mine. I simply stopped carrying it. From the parking lot that night, at 12:06 a.m., I called again and confirmed the removal was complete. A woman in accounts named Sharon verified that the loan was already delinquent and that a default notice for the outstanding balance, roughly $4,200, 2 missed payments, would be generated and mailed within 5 to 7 business days. Then she asked if there was anything else she could help me with. I said no. I thanked her. Then I started driving. 8 hours through rain and dark highway with a split lip, a throbbing cheek, and a playlist I hadn't touched in years because it belonged to a version of me I thought I'd outgrown. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rehearse speeches in my head. My mind felt unnervingly still, like some internal alarm had finally stopped because the building had already burned down. I reached Charlotte at 8:17 in the morning with 4 hours to spare. The firm had booked me into a hotel uptown. I checked in, rode the elevator with 2 men in conference badges who smelled like aftershave and airport coffee, and went straight to the room. I showered until the hot water started to cool. I stood under it longer than necessary, one hand braced against tile, watching diluted foundation from the night before circle the drain. Then I got out and started rebuilding my face. Primer, corrector, concealer, foundation, more concealer, not to hide what happened, to control who got access to it. By the time I finished, the bruise had been reduced to something a stranger might mistake for exhaustion. I pulled on my navy suit, dried my hair, opened my laptop on the desk by the window, and ran the deck one last time. Slide 12. Margin adjustment. Slide 19. Risk language tightened. Slide 27. Transition simplified. Outside, the city moved in clean lines below me. Inside, my phone stayed face down on the desk. It had already started buzzing. I didn't need to look to know who it was, and for the first time in years, I let it ring. By noon, the bruise had settled into something uglier than pain. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just tender and yellowing under the skin, like damage already trying to hide itself. I covered it anyway, completely. Then I put on red lipstick, and for the first time in days, I looked exactly like someone no one should underestimate. I used 2 layers of full coverage foundation and the setting powder my college roommate used to call the expensive miracle. The good stuff. By the time I finished, my cheek looked untouched, unless you knew where to look, and nobody in that room was going to know. I pulled on the navy blazer I had steamed and packed before any of this happened, back when the week had still belonged to ordinary stress instead of collapse, and I stood in front of the mirror for 1 extra beat longer than usual, not to admire anything, just to make sure I was all the way back inside myself. I walked into Ellery Freight's conference room at exactly 12 p.m. Waiting for me were their CFO, Daniel Mercer, the VP of Operations, Renee Holloway, and 3 other members of the executive team. Daniel was the real decision-maker. I had known that for weeks. He had the kind of face that had gone flat from too many polished sales pitches and too many people mistaking charm for substance. He wasn't there to be impressed. He was there to eliminate risk. Good. So was I. For the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, I gave them exactly what they came for. No filler, no performance. I walked them through operational bottlenecks, inefficiencies in vendor coordination, margin compression, implementation timelines, integration risk, and the recovery structure our firm could execute faster than the other two finalists. When Daniel pushed on rollout cost, I had the number. When Renee challenged our staffing assumptions, I had the modeling. When one of the executives raised a concern I hadn't expected, I adjusted in real time and answered it cleanly enough that no one circled back. I didn't use my notes once. At the end, Daniel leaned back in his chair and asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why your firm over the other two? I had been building that answer for 6 weeks, refining it in airports, in elevators, in late-night revisions, and during 8 straight hours of rain and highway with my cheek throbbing and my father's hand still fresh in my memory. So when I answered, I didn't rush. I told him the truth, stripped of fluff, that the other firms could diagnose, but we could execute, that they were buying not recommendations, but velocity, accountability, and a team already aligned around measurable recovery, not abstract strategy. While I spoke, I watched his expression shift. Not visibly, not in any dramatic way, just enough. Skeptical to attentive, attentive to thoughtful, thoughtful to something that looked almost settled. On the way out, Renee shook my hand and said, "We'll be in touch within 48 hours." The call came 19 hours later. It was Nisha. She had seen the email first and forwarded it to me with a string of exclamation points so excessive I actually stared at the screen for a second, trying to decide if someone else had gotten a hold of her account. Ellery Freight had chosen Halcyon Ridge. Initial contract value, $1.2 million. A minute later, my managing director, Graham Calloway, a man so sparing with praise it almost functioned as a myth, sent me a one-line email. Outstanding work. We should discuss your title. I read it sitting on the balcony of my hotel room, 20 floors up, with a glass of red wine in one hand and the late afternoon light turning the skyline gold. The city below me looked orderly, clean, like systems worked when people respected them. That was when my mother called. "Why is the Wi-Fi down?" she asked. No hello, no hesitation, no careful approach. Not even a pause long enough to pretend she had considered one. Just immediate inconvenience, delivered like accusation. I said nothing for a second. Then she added, "The bank called about Aubrey's car, too. Did something happen to your accounts?" I looked out over the river. I thought about Sharon in mortgage servicing. I thought about the default notice that should have arrived by then. Maybe that morning, maybe the next. I thought about the envelope sitting in their mailbox like a long overdue translation. "My accounts are fine," I said. "Then fix it. Right now. Aubrey can't even post her spa content. This is a disaster." There it was again, that family gift. The ability to put the word disaster next to the wrong thing and say it with conviction. "I stopped paying," I said. Silence. Then, carefully, because apparently I owed even the truth a clean delivery, I added, "Your husband slapped me for asking to borrow a car." The temperature of the call changed instantly. My mother has a mode she enters when dismissal stops working. It's loud, fast, breathless, and strangely efficient at cycling through blame, injury, revisionist history, and self-pity without ever fully landing on accountability. I held the phone slightly away from my ear and let her spin. Her voice rose, broke, sharpened, softened, then rose again. Beneath me, a ferry moved slowly across the water, steady and indifferent. Then my father took the phone. I knew from the first word that he was using his threat voice. Lower than usual, colder, measured in that deliberate way weak men mistake for control. He said I had obligations to this family. He said I was being vindictive. He said if I thought I could embarrass him like this, he would come to my office and... "Before you get in the car," I said, "go check the mailbox." He stopped. For a second, all I heard was breathing, then movement, A chair scraping. Footsteps. The front door opening. The hollow knock of the storm door. The soft scuff of his slippers against the porch. The metal creak of the mailbox. Paper shifting. An envelope tearing open. Nothing. And then, finally. What is this? His voice had changed. The force was gone. What remained was stripped and flat, like a man reading a language he thought he'd never have to learn. "What is this notice of default?" he said. 15,000 past due. Natalie, what did you do? I took a sip of wine. I stopped carrying you, I said, 2 months ago. That was when I heard something I had never once heard from my father in 31 years. Panic. Real panic. Not anger disguised as authority. Not offense disguised as principle. Panic. The sound a person makes when they realize the floor under them was never floor at all, just someone else's hand. And that hand has finally moved. "We could lose the house," he said. "Natalie, this is our home." "It's in your name," I said. "So is the debt." The threat voice didn't come back. Instead, he started begging. My father, the man who crossed a room and hit me over a car, started begging. He called me sweetheart. He called me honey. He said he was sorry. He said he lost his temper. He said he didn't mean it. The words came fast now, tripping over each other, soft and frantic, and suddenly full of tenderness he had apparently kept in storage for emergencies involving himself. "Please," he said. "Please, baby, please." The begging didn't last. Something louder cut through it. Not grief, not regret. Aubrey was screaming. At first, it was muffled in the background, the way chaos sounds when it hasn't fully reached the person holding the phone. Then her voice broke clear and sharp enough to slice through everything else. "My car. Mom, my car. They're taking my car." The day before, somewhere off the interstate with rain hammering the windshield, I had called the leasing company and spoken to a collections rep named Brandon. He had the calm efficiency of someone who explains consequences for a living. Since the scheduled payment was no longer processing, the account would move forward exactly as outlined in the contract. Repossession would be initiated on their timeline, not mine. I remember thanking him, hanging up and driving another 100 miles without turning the radio on. Now the timeline had arrived. Through the phone, I heard the low diesel rumble of a tow truck, the metallic clank of chain, a hitch locking into place. Aubrey's voice shot upward into that high, splintering register people hit, when reality finally stops negotiating with them. My mother kept saying my name over and over. Natalie, Natalie, Natalie. Like repetition could reverse logistics. My father had gone quiet, except for these small, broken sounds that didn't sound like him at all. I waited. Not because I was savoring it, because timing matters. There are moments when people become briefly capable of hearing the truth, and most of them are ugly. When Aubrey's panic peaked, I said, "This seems like a great time for her energy work to kick in." Then I hung up. I know what people want from stories like this. Not the clean ending, the accounting, the weeks after, the fallout, whether I softened, whether they changed, whether anyone learned anything worth calling redemption. Here's the honest version. My father called 17 times in the next 3 days. I answered once, on the 4th day, because there were practical matters, and I have always had a weakness for practicality. Even when it has been used against me, I still believe in giving people accurate information. I just no longer confuse that with saving them. By then, I had already done something I'm still not sure most people would have done. I had found him help, not money, not rescue. Help. Before I returned from Charlotte, I called a HUD-approved housing counselor named Stephen Rains, a foreclosure prevention specialist with more than 20 years of experience helping people navigate exactly the kind of mess my parents were now in. When my father finally reached me on day 4, his voice was worn thin and performatively controlled, the way people sound when they're trying to act like they're managing a crisis already bigger than them. I gave him Stephen's number. I explained, Once, clearly, loan modification might be possible. A repayment plan might be possible. Depending on the lender and the delinquency status, there might even be time to avoid the worst-case outcome if he stopped posturing and started participating. If none of that worked, there were still structured exits more dignified than denial. I did not offer to restart the mortgage. I did not offer to restore the utilities, internet, car lease, streaming accounts, or grocery delivery. What I offered was a phone number, and the truth. The responsibility was now where it should have been all along. He called Stephen. I know because, with my father's signed consent, Stephen later sent a brief confirmation that the intake had been completed, and modification review was underway. No promises, no miracle language, just process. It was uncertain, which felt appropriate. The house, after all, was in my father's name. So was the debt. Aubrey never called me. I didn't expect her to. People like my sister don't usually reach for accountability first. They reach for the nearest softer landing. Without me funding the illusion of her brand, she moved in with a friend on the east side of Columbus. The last thing I heard, through the kind of sideways social overlap that still happens no matter how carefully you cut ties, was that she'd taken a part-time job at a juice bar. I don't know if that was growth. I suspect it was necessity. But necessity is often the first honest thing that enters a person's life. My mother called twice more. Both times she tried to frame what happened as something blurred and shared, a mutual breakdown, a misunderstanding, an unfortunate escalation between multiple parties. She kept reaching for language that would spread the weight around evenly, because even now her strongest instinct was not truth. It was symmetry. If everyone was a little wrong, then no one had to be fully accountable. I told her the same thing both times. I was willing to have a different conversation when she was ready to begin with what she had watched happen in her living room and chosen not to stop. She never called back. The week I got home, I went to see Dr. Elena Price. Her office is in a quiet building downtown, full of filtered light, bookshelves, and the kind of deliberate stillness that makes you aware of how loud your own internal life has been. I had been sitting in that room for 2 years, having variations of the same conversation about guilt, obligation, competence, loyalty, resentment, fear, and now, finally, I had something new to tell her. So I told her all of it. The slap. The drive, the presentation, the contract, the call from my mother, my father begging, Aubrey screaming as the car was hauled away, the gold light over the water while my old life came apart 3 states away. She listened the way she always listened, completely, not interrupting, not rushing to interpret. Just there, in that unnerving, generous way that makes you feel both seen and unhidden. When I finished, she asked, "How do you feel?" I didn't give her the polished answer. Not the one built for smart women who have survived something and want to sound measured in the aftermath. I sat with it for a second and gave her the real one. "Clean," I said. The word surprised even me, but once it was out, I knew it was right. "Like I put something down," I said. Something I'd been carrying so long I didn't realize it had started changing my shape. She nodded once. "That's worth paying attention to." "I'm not happy," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't feel triumphant. I don't feel vindicated. I feel like I finally got honest." "About what?" I looked at the plant near her window, at the notebook open on her lap, at my own hands folded too tightly. "That paying for them was love," I said. "It wasn't. It was fear." She didn't speak, so I kept going. Fear that if I stopped, they'd confirm what I'd always known, that my value to them was financial, not relational, conditional, not human. I swallowed once, and they did confirm it, the second he hit me for asking to borrow something I was already paying for. Dr. Price wrote something down then. She doesn't write constantly, only at certain moments, and I've always found that strangely stabilizing, the idea that something painful can also be precise enough to record. After a second, she looked up and asked, "How did the meeting go?" And for the first time since I sat down, I smiled. The call ended, but the shift didn't. That was the real ending. Not the slap, not the repossession, not even my father begging. The real ending was quieter than that, which is how permanent things usually arrive. "We got the contract," I told Dr. Price. She smiled like she'd known before I said it. "Of course you did." There is an epilogue to all this, though it isn't dramatic. Most lives aren't built out of dramatic moments. They're built out of what remains after one. The part where you wake up, go to work, answer emails, buy groceries, sit in traffic, and slowly realize the shape of your days has changed because the shape of you has changed. Graham Calloway followed through. 3 months after Charlotte, I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Client Strategy at Halcyon Ridge. I lead a team of 7 now. I manage a portfolio I'm genuinely proud of. I live on the 20th floor of a building downtown, in an apartment with a balcony that gets late afternoon light, and a river view I never fully get tired of. I use that balcony more than any square footage I've ever paid for. Some evenings, I sit out there with a glass of wine and no music, and let the quiet stay quiet. I still drive the same Subaru Outback. It came out of the shop 2 days after I got back from Charlotte, and I've put 14,000 miles on it since. It's reliable, unflashy, functional, and never once has it required me to invent a story about what it means in order to justify keeping it. Lately, I've started to think that may be one of the highest compliments I can offer anything. The Persian rug is no longer in my parents' house. A few weeks after everything happened, I went back once to collect the few things I had left there. I brought a friend with me, and I made sure to go on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my parents would both be out. I was in that house less than 20 minutes, long enough to gather a box from the hall closet, a framed photo from my old bedroom, 2 winter coats, and the rug. I rolled it up myself. It lives in my office now, under the conference table where my team has Monday morning meetings. Cream-colored, hand-knotted, 8x10, $20,400. Every week, people walk over it discussing budgets, staffing models, timelines, client risk, and quarterly planning. No one there knows what it cost me beyond money. That's fine. I know. And maybe that's enough. I've thought many times about whether I did the right thing. I've turned it over from every angle I know how to access, because that's what people like me do when something hurts and also liberates. We investigate it until we can almost mistake analysis for peace. The truth is, it isn't a simple question, and I don't trust simple answers. My parents may still lose that house. That is real. It is hard. And even now, some part of me feels the pull of that fact, the old reflex to step in, solve it, soften the landing, convert consequence into something manageable before it reaches them. That reflex doesn't vanish just because you stop obeying it. It lingers. It flares. It tries to pass itself off as compassion, when sometimes it's only old conditioning in a nicer coat. But here is what I know now, and I know it with a steadiness I didn't have before. You can love people and still stop financing the version of your life that requires your silence. You can care about what happens to someone and still refuse to be the material they stand on while they diminish you. You can grieve the family you should have had and still walk away from the one you got. You can stand up from a Persian rug you bought with your own money in a house you were helping hold together and decide, quietly, fully, without spectacle, that this is the last time. That decision still feels important to me, maybe because it was so undramatic in the moment. No speech, no grand exit, no shattered glass version of courage. Just a calm, irreversible internal line. The kind that matters more because no one sees it happen until they crash into it later. I bought that rug because I wanted my mother to love it. That's the part I kept circling for a long time. Not the money, not the optics, the hope inside the purchase. The childlike equation hidden inside an adult gesture. If I choose carefully enough, if I give enough, if I anticipate the right want before it becomes a need, Maybe this time I'll be met with something steady. Maybe this time I'll be loved in a way I can actually feel. What I understand now, sitting 20 floors above the city, with the skyline going gold and a silence that no longer scares me, is that I was always the one worth loving. Not because I performed well enough, not because I paid enough, not because I stayed useful, just because I was. It took me 31 years to understand that. 31 years, one split lip, one rain-soaked drive, one contract, one repossession, one default notice, and one open-handed slap, hard enough to break the last lie I was still telling myself. Not that they would change. Something sadder than that. That if I gave enough, I could earn the right not to be hurt. I can't. No one can. But I did finally learn something better. I learned I could leave. And once I did, everything after that, promotion, apartment, balcony, quiet, the clean weight of my own life, arranged around my own choices, wasn't revenge. It was just what became possible the second I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered.